Okay. Good morning. I'm David Goldstein from Mekko Graphics, and we're going to start our webinar. The webinar is called 10 Strategy Charts. And what I'm going to do is spend the next 30 minutes going through those 10 charts, showing you the types of charts that strategy consultants and other strategy professionals use on a day-to-day basis. My hope is that you'll learn some new types of charts and incorporate them into the presentations that you're building in the future. In terms of the logistics, I will go through the charts. One of my colleagues is available to answer your questions during the webinar, and I will stick around at the end of the webinar and also be available to answer questions. What we'll do is we'll work through the deck. We'll work through each of the charts. Each of the charts I've got 2 or 3 slides for. The first slide is kind of a reference slide. It'll talk about the kinds of questions available, kinds of the chart type, the kinds of business questions the chart will answer, and some examples and some tips. I'm going to skip over this slide in my webinar, but you will get a copy of this deck, and I think you'll find this slide useful as a reference slide moving forward. We are also recording this webinar, so you'll be able to go back to it and share it with colleagues if you find it useful. So let's just dive in. Let's start with the market map. The market map is done with a Mekko chart, and the market map is a great chart if you're trying to understand a market and how it is segmented. You can do it at a high level, like the chart you're looking at now, which breaks down the $2 trillion information technology market into categories and subcategories. You can have the percentages in the categories and subcategories. You can use color, as I did in this chart. I colored each bar separately to call out the nature of to call out the information in the bars. The more classic use of the market map is to look at competitors and look at competitors by product line. So this is sort of a classic market map example of a market that is relatively fragmented. So you can see that you've got different competitors in the different market segments, and each of the market segments, each of the main market segments is relatively small, and the other segment is very large, and the other category in each of the subsegments is also fairly large. So my tip for making a market map, 2 tips. One is you would typically sort your bars, so the widest bar is on the left, although you might put the other bar on the right, and you would sort your segments so that within each bar the largest segment is on the bottom, and by default, if you group your smaller segments into other, which is a Mekko Graphics feature, you can include the other segment on the top of each bar, as I did in this example. Second chart I want to show you is a segment growth chart. We make this with a bar Mekko chart type. This is a great chart if you're looking at the market segments and you're trying to understand something about the size of each segment and also the growth potential or the historical growth of each segment. So this sort is a little different than doing this in just a standard bar chart, because not only do we have the growth as the height of the bar, but we also have the segment size as the width of the bar. So you can see luxury cars is not only the fastest growing segment, but also the largest segment. Whereas another segment, personal luxury goods, is growing much more slowly, and it's the second largest of the segments. The nice tip with the segment growth chart is that you can have both positive and negative growth in the chart. I often add a data row to the bottom. The data row is the best way to show the market size in the segment growth chart. And if you want, you can add a total column to the right-hand side of the chart. Sometimes you'll even add an average line, which will show average growth on the chart as well. So just a few a few tips to use the bar Mekko for tracking segment growth. The next chart I want to show you is a bubble chart, which I would use for growth comparison. So in a chart like this, you would set one of the axes of the bubble chart to growth. Here it's the y-axis, and the other axis to some factor that might influence growth. In this case, cost per unit. So I'm laying out the countries here, and I'm using color as another dimension to the chart, and I'm using color to group and categorize my markets. It's always a nice tip in the bubble charts to use color as an extra dimension in the chart, and also to use the quadrant lines to help divide up the chart. So again, I'm using color and quadrant lines in this growth comparison chart, where growth is on my x-axis, factor affecting growth, which is technology salary, on my y-axis, and the size of the bubble is the size of the market. In this case, the number of tech jobs in each of these cities. The fourth chart, also a bubble chart, and here's a bubble chart where I'm using to segment my customers along two key dimensions. Here, I'm looking at average spend as one dimension and consumption frequency as another dimension. I added a stacked bar, 100% stacked bar chart to the left-hand side of the slide to help organize better the size of each of the categories in the chart to help show that better. And then I'm also using my legend on the right-hand side to explain the categories in more detail. And the nice thing about using the bubble here is you can have qualitative data as well as quantitative data. Here I've got consumption frequency and average spend, but I could also have perceived brand loyalty or something like that as my X or Y axis in this bubble chart. The third bubble, and the last bubble, I promise, is a competitive profitability chart. It's a chart where you measure return on sales versus relative market share. This is probably one of the least used of the charts, but it can be very powerful in specific instances. It works very well for industries that are driven by size, where size and profitability are related. So the auto industry is a great example of that. So we're going to measure size by relative market share on the x-axis and profitability here by margin on the y-axis. We often add a normative band to the chart. The notion is that the companies within the normative band are as you would predict, the relationship between size and profit is as you would have predicted, and the outliers are outside of the normative band. In this case, BMW and Daimler have higher margins than would be predicted by their size. General Motors has a lower margin than would have been predicted by its size. So I'm going to go from a chart that has very narrow use to one of the charts that I use most frequently, and it's the profile chart, and it's a 100% stacked bar chart that I use to profile all kinds of different things. So in this example, I'm profiling internet revenue, and I'm profiling it along a bunch of different measures. So I'm looking at revenue by platform, revenue by time of year, by market concentration, and by advertising format. So here I'm taking what I might show in 4 different charts, or maybe in 4 different pie charts in some instances, and combining it into one 100% stacked bar chart with different measures in different bars, and it really just puts a lot of data on in one slide. And again, here it's internet advertising revenue. Here I'm using the chart in a more generic sense to profile, say, a competitor or a partner or an acquisition target, and I'm profiling based on the type of purchase, the type of opportunity, the type of customer, the customer's location, and the customer's tenure. So it gives you a sense of this company along a bunch of different dimensions in just one chart. Private equity firms are big fans of this chart when they're doing due diligence. And you can also use this chart to profile customers in a B2C environment. So here I'm profiling the typical customer by age, by family, gender, ethnicity, location in terms of urban versus suburban and rural, and also location by state. So again, I really like this profile chart. Very easy, lots of information just in one slide. Another chart that's very common and I think very useful is using a cascade or waterfall chart to look at change. There are a bunch of ways you might use this chart to look at change. One of them is to look at change in revenue, change in sales. And here I'm looking at change in sales over time and splitting out a couple of trends. The trend between 1995 and 2004, which was an increase, and I'm breaking it down by region. And now then I'm looking at the change between 2004 and 2012, again in the same region, and here it's a major decrease. I'm using the bar comparison lines to drive home that difference. Here's another example where I'm doing analysis of change. Here I'm looking at change in sales, and I'm using a standard kind of variance analysis to break it out in terms of acquisitions, volume, and price mix variance. And again, using the bar comparison line, but in this case, also using the axis break to shrink these large bars so we can focus our attention on the relative size of the different factors influencing the change. The last example from my change analysis is a projected change. This is sort of classic. A consultant is coming in and is saying, well, I can increase your margin, and this is how I'm going to do it. I'm going to increase your margins 17% over the next couple of years. I'm going to grow them from 9.2% to 10.75%, and I'm going to do it through these five steps. And I'm just laying out the steps here. So very powerful way, rather than just a set of bullet points, to drive home the margin increase and the benefits of the analysis in one slide. So a couple more charts to show you, a couple more examples that I find very useful in the consulting environment. One is well, three more. One is the segment drill down. So here it's a question of I'm breaking down a market by segments, and there's some segment that I really want to focus on and I really need to expand. It might be a small segment like this other segment. Here I'm looking at tobacco products, and 87% of the tobacco revenue, is through cigarettes, but there's a lot of interesting growth in some of these smaller segments. So I'm breaking out the smaller segments here, which are just 5% of the market. I'm including CAGR for the major segments and also the CAGR, projected CAGR for these smaller segments. And here you can very easily see that there's hardly any growth in the largest segment, but there's some significant growth potential in a couple of these smaller segments, especially this heated tobacco products segment. Another way to use the segment drill down is with the sort of the key category in the segment. In this case, we're looking at restaurant costs, and food and beverage is the largest category, making up about a little over a third of the costs. And we want to split that category up to understand it in more detail, and that you can see in this instance, beef is the biggest part of that cost. So just 100% stack bar chart with a couple of bars, and we're using these segment links to show that the bar on the right is an expansion of one section of the bar on the left. So another chart that I find really useful, very common, but very powerful, is a trend analysis chart. And I'll typically do the trend analysis in a stacked bar chart like this one. And you can see here in this stacked bar chart, I'm adding growth lines. In this case, we've got a very strong change between 2017 and 2018. So we're showing high growth for these first 12 years, and then low growth, or then shrinkage for the next two. And we can highlight that not only with the columns in the bar chart, but also with the CAGR columns. And then if you want to focus on individual growth, you can show individual year-over-year growth in each of the categories in these data rows. At the bottom of the chart, this is again an example. And here I'm using the CAGR column on the right-hand side of the chart to show growth in each of the categories. One of the downsides of this trend analysis chart is sometimes it's hard to identify which of the categories are growing faster than the others. So we show the overall growth here in the growth line, and then I can show category growth in the CAGR column on the right-hand side, and I can align my legend with CAGR. So I've got my data in my chart, my legend to the right, and the CAGR right next to the legend. So very easy to show overall growth and individual item growth in a chart like this. And the last chart I wanted to show you is this mix analysis chart. So this chart is a great chart if you're looking at product mix and product mix differences. So you would look at product mix differences, in this case by country. So here we're looking at meat consumption. And the mix is very different in the United States, which is heavily poultry oriented, Argentina, heavily beef oriented, and China, heavily pork oriented. So you can easily see this by comparing the mix of the different meats in the different countries. And it's all 100%, so we're ignoring the fact that probably overall meat consumption is much lower in a country like India than it is in the United States. We're just looking at the mix of different meat products. And then I've got the world mix here on the right-hand side as a benchmark. And then the other place that's very common to look at mix analysis is to look at mix analysis over time. So here I'm looking at vehicle purchases, and very clear trend in terms of the increased age of motor vehicle consumers in the United States between 2007 and 2017. And one way to show that strongly is to leave out a lot of the years in between. If the trend is pretty constant over time, you can just show 07 and 17. You can use the data column on the right-hand side to show percent change, and the segment links to help reinforce that change. And also sometimes you might have a bunch of years data by year, but you might not want to show every year. I think when I first made this chart, I showed every year between 2010 and 2018, but the trend was much clearer if I left out a few years. And here you can see the trend is very clear in smartphone purchases, that the high end and the low end were growing, and the middle was shrinking, and that's reinforced with this CAGR column on the right-hand side. And again, I've got the percentages in my bars, the legend and the CAGR column aligned and on the right-hand side. So very easy to read the chart from left to right. So those are my charts. I hope those those 10 were useful. You can see them here in the little summary. Maybe some of them were new to you. Maybe you'll be able to include some of those charts in the decks that you make in the future. Again, I think this little intro slide in each category can be useful, and you will get the deck with this information in it. And if you want more information, the last slide in the deck, which I'm going to get to here, the last slide in the deck has links to some other resources. We've got some great resources on our website. We've got a chart selection presentation, which might help you figure out where you might use these different types of charts. We've got more information on Mekko charts and Cascade charts in web pages. We've got a webinar. If you're new to Mekko Graphics and want to learn how to make these charts, I would encourage you to take a look at the webinars available on our website and the short videos, how to make a Mekko chart, how to add data rows to your chart. If you haven't used our software, I would encourage you to click on the link and download our free trial. If you want to learn more and see more chart examples, I would suggest looking at our chart of the week, and you can subscribe to that. There'll be a link in the deck for that. And we've also got a tips and tricks blog, Build Your CQ, that's also worth looking at. So I'm going to wrap up. I did this all in hopefully in about 20 minutes or so, 25 minutes. I'll leave some time for questions. I will stick around, and thank you very much for attending the webinar, and I hope you found it useful. So if you've got questions, just feel free to ask them in the question section of the webinar. If there's a specific chart you'd like me to show you how to make, I'm happy to spend a minute and do that as well. Great, thanks so much. I will stick around. Just let me know.